You know what it is. That's right. It's time to talk money with your money nerd and financial coach. Now, tighten those purse strings and open those ears. It's the Money Talk with Tiff podcast.
All right. Hello, hello, hello. I gave everyone speaker permissions. How are y'all doing tonight? Hello. Can y'all hear me? Oh, nice. Nice, nice, nice. I know I still got to finish tomorrow's episode. I tried to stay ahead of the game, but fell off. How's everybody else doing? Hello. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, everybody else are listeners right now.
Oh, okay. Hmm. Well, I've invited everybody up. So let me send them again.
What up?
Hey,
What up?
How
how
y'all doing?
how art thou?
I'm chilling. I'm chilling.
Okay, okay. All right, cool beans. So we'll go ahead and get started for the sake of time. This is Fin Noir, a space for Black money talks. This is where we get on and talk about money topics as it relates to Black folks like us. My name is Tiffany Grant, and I run Money Talk with Tiff, which is a financial education platform. And my co-host is Rahkim Sabree. So go ahead, Rahkim.
Rahkim Sabree here. As you all know, I cover financial trauma and financial empowerment for people who look like me. And I am the host of the Overcoming Financial Trauma podcast.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Anthony?
Hello, everybody. I am the host of the About That Water podcast, where we help you build strong financial habits.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Hey, good evening. Sorry, hopefully people can hear me. I was having issues with my mic, but Jonathan Thomas, I help people build wealth. Use your bank to partner along the path with you. You can find me on TikTok, J Thomas Solutions, and IG, J Thomas Solution.
Thank you, sir. And I'm going to hop back up to Markia.
Hello, everybody. My name is Markia. I'm known as the Money Plug here on social media. I'm a credit specialist who is just obsessed, apparently, with pointing people in the right direction and exposing fraudulent credit repair specialists on social media.
Thank you. That should you should keep that as part of your intro.
They
I
Exposing
were
used
more
to,
than
fraud.
in
easy
one of
have
my
them next
videos,
time.
in my playlist, I used to call myself the Credit Chris Hansen.
All right. And Tamika.
Hi, my name is Tamika Howell. I'm a financial educator and I simplify money management for busy and easy distracted Black women.
Thank you, ma'am. So, this is our panel for today. So far, more people might hop in, but for this conversation, I was like, "It's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day." So I was like, "Let's do an MLK edition, right?" And so, in doing my research on this, I was like, "Did MLK even talk about money in any of his speeches?" Because I know it was all about like equality, and it was during the civil rights movement, so it was all about that. But I'm like, was there any money topics covered? And lo and behold, he talked a lot about money in a lot of his speeches. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up, and then we can kind of just free flow from some of that. So, one thing I came across was, which we've made this point before and we've talked about it a little bit, I think sometime last year, but he talks about in one of his speeches materialism, right? So, I'll just name off one of the quotes. I'll say one of the quotes, and you all can just give your thoughts on it. So, the quote is, "We do not have to look very far to see the tragic consequences which develop when men worship the mighty, almighty dollar. It causes men to be more concerned about making a living than a life." And I said, "Ooh, that was good." But we know he was a preacher. So, what are you all's thoughts? To start us off, I can go ahead and give mine. When I read that, I said, "Ooh, that's a word right there," because even going into the topic we talked about last week about, all the hiring and stuff and needing to move around. If you're trying to make moves, now's the time, so on and so forth. And a lot of time we spend chasing money, chasing making a living versus living a life. And I was just like, that quote really spoke volumes, because at the end of the day, are we just chasing, like, we all say, "Oh, don't chase the money, don't do this," but are we really doing that like on a daily basis for real? So, yeah, go ahead, Rakim.
I had to jump up in here. So I have mixed feelings on it because while I agree with the sentiment, I think that the words can often and do often get kind of twisted to fit whatever the agenda of the person who is quoting Dr. King. In this particular instance, I think those words could be used oppressively, to discourage people from participating in capitalism, black people specifically, from participating in capitalism as the dominant economic system, which in turn keeps us behind. And so, again, feel very strongly about the sentiment around worshiping money and placing money on a pedestal, but also wanting us to be conscious of the money scripts, that we may have internalized as it relates to, the often misquoted scripture, money being the root of all evil, and that, understanding that money is a tool, money in and of itself is not evil. What we choose to do with money could be evil, and certainly, um, who we become once we acquire that money. So, I'm gonna leave it there.
It would help if I get off mute. Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, because I mean, we talked about that also, I think, in another fin noir where, you know as black people, do we feel worthy of making money, and all of that in capitalism and so on and so forth. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because it's super important, and I can see how that could be twisted into that. um, so you made an excellent point. Did anybody else have any thoughts just around that quote, or what Rakim said, or what I said? Anthony?
Yeah, just going off of what Rakim was talking about, as far as the participation in capitalism, I think that is really important that we also look at what we have in front of us. I mean, honestly, I think we all talked about this before. It's like chasing money in some aspects. It really depends on where you at in your financial journey. because in the beginning, all of us were hustling to try to at least scrape 2 pennies together to try to make sure that we either A, have everything that we need, and B, possibly try to find a way to, continue to put food on the table, but also enjoy our lives. In order for us to enjoy our lives, unfortunately, is that we need that financial capital, which in again is participating in the capitalist society that's already in place. So, and that's one of the things that I think that we could actually take away, like try to take away from it, um, where you are in your journey and finances. So that's why I yield.
Yes, thank you so much, Anthony. And Markia, I saw your hand go up.
And it's crazy because of how indoctrinated we are to put the value um of life kind of to tie it up in the dollar, because we're taught, well, I was taught anyway, like you go to school, you got to go to college, you got to get a really good job with really nice benefits, you got to work 40 hours, work overtime if you have to set, because we're black, so that means we got to work twice as hard to look half as good. So then we're putting all this extra work on top of the work we're already doing. And then, society pressures, like if you're not doing that, if you're not giving 1,000% to the job, um, and putting all those hours in, then are you really successful? Like this whole like rise of the entrepreneur recently, for a lot of us, this was our first taste at, wait, so I don't have to work 40 hours a week to fucking make a decent living, or I don't have to, be a slave to a paycheck. I can be happy not having a corporate style job. It really allowed those of us who were so hell bent on living life a specific way, based off of what we were taught. And this kind of goes towards like, why do people put that value in it? It's because I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. I was one of those people. I joined the military not because I was super patriotic. I joined the military because it was a check and some insurance. And I put my life on the line, literally for a check, for the promise to pay my college tuition, knowing that I might not even make it to college. Like, and the fact that I was so comfortable doing that because I valued money, and that I just valued it so much that I literally put my life on the line. It's so crazy looking back on it now.
Yeah, that's deep. And like you said, a lot of people that go into the military, they don't even think about it like that. So, hindsight 2020. Jonathan, I think I seen your hand next.
Yeah, before I get into my point, Markia, it's so interesting that you brought that up. Great to hear from you again, sis. That a good college friend of mine, one of my fraternity brothers, I got to meet up with him at Waffle House, and I didn't understand how he went from college to going into the military, and he has a family now and all that. But it boiled down. That was the first thing out of his mouth. He was like, never have to worry about healthcare. He was like, you can have all the money in the world, but he was like, the healthcare, my kids, my wife. He was like, to know that we're 100% good, it's worth it. I'll make that choice 3-4 times over. I thought it really took me back because I was expecting him to say something like, "Yeah, grew up military." The motivation, I expected his motivations to be different, and definitely learned something. But to you guys, to your earlier point, is when I hear and I kind of went down a little rabbit hole with Dr. King, um, looking at, hey, with someone who had such an impact and a voice, was there anything said about money? And some of the stuff that I came up with, much to not surprising, was that it's the same message that we all kind of speak about now, the keeping up with the Joneses, the can you kind of identify. I know back then he was more, at least my impression was he was trying to get the equality tone. It talked about oppression, talked about just moving forward as a people. But one of the things that he came up with in that was, do you ever see people buy cars that they can't even begin to buy in terms of their income? You've seen people riding around in Cadillacs and Chrysler who don't earn enough at that time to buy a good T Model Ford. Economists say buy a car 50% of your income, and yet people make 5,000 a year, and yet they're buying a car that costs 6. And some of those same behaviors, like we see that now But what it translates back in is you wanted to be seen as successful. And until each one of us, we have to determine ultimately what that success is. Because, like you guys said, the whole hustle culture piece, especially in this new mix of generations and everything that all these CEOs worried that we don't have workers because people aren't buying into the fact that they want to kill themselves to move up the corporate chain. Younger people aren't wanting to enter the workforce, and they're finding ways to live the life or live a different style life without the corporate pace. So how will they in turn keep their businesses sustainable and going forward while retirees are exiting the workforce? A lot of these things are coming up like we're in a big what I would consider one of the biggest crux of culture identity, because you have so much that's come out over the last couple of years while you've taken the nation America through what I would consider an identity crisis in the whole COVID-19 situation, whether you believe it was on purpose or accident, however it is. Suffice to say, you lock down a scenario with people, and now people coming out with priority shifts, value shifts that don't necessarily align with, again, to Rahkim's point, the capitalistic culture.
Yes, yes, thank you. I was over here. I wish y'all could see me just nodding my head so hard. I'm like, it's not video, Tiff. It's not video. All right. I want to go to Camari and then Andre.
Happy MLK, everybody. Glad to be here. Sorry I was late. My thoughts about MLK are kind of interesting. The MLK that they portray now is kind of watered down. You would think that everybody loved MLK. The whole black church loved MLK, and that just ain't so. There's an interesting movie called I want to say it's the Vernon Johns. I'm trying to think. Vernon John. It was either Vernon Johns, not Vernon Jordan, Vernon Johns, but the pastor that was right before King in Atlanta, kind of mentored him, and he was pro black business, and King got a lot of his ideas and a lot of his foundation from him, and is often missed upon. And many people don't realize that Martin kind of moved, right? I mean, he wasn't just stagnant. He was about equality, but he was always about understanding that money moved the needle, whether it was on the black side or the white side. And I mean, there are speeches of him out there talking about close down your accounts at white banks, move your money to black banks, open life insurance with black life insurance companies. And, again, a lot of that is missed. He was very much pro-black. And I feel like during these times, that's really, really important to bring up. While he might not be as electric as a Malcolm at that time, but all of them moved. They're human beings. So, I like all parts of Martin. He was very much a thinker, but very much pro-black across the board. So that's all I got.
Yes, thank you, Kamari. Thank you, thank you. And I know we talked about this, I think, on a previous space where we, stress the importance of buying black and, patronizing our black brothers and sisters as a way to move the needle forward. And I just want to reset the room real quick. Just make sure that you're checking out the pinned tweets at the top. Every quote that we're going to be going over, I'm going to pin it at the top as well. So the one that we're going over is the second tweet up there, and then just check out the other ones as the speakers are talking. All right, go ahead, Andre.
Thank you so much, Tiff. Thanks to the room. This is it's a very special topic to me. I'm a realtor based in New York, so I've seen some of the horrors that King was fighting against in my time, and the the previous speaker, he spoke to, you know, the kind of moment that it is now, right? And we can assess. I was in another room where they were talking about, how do we compare if we're better or worse off after King? And I realized us as Black people, his community really, we lost his message. We didn't really understand fully where he was coming from, because they stopped us from fully getting a grasp of his what made him such a threat, right? So, we talk about Black business and Black capitalism, and like I say, I'm in the real estate financial services sector. I'm in the thick of it, and I've been incentivized, to evict a single mother of a sick child. I've seen how investors literally will express in no ambiguous terms how they are actively avoiding the inclusionary zoning, right? That the government is supposed to be putting in place and that they are supposed to be subscribing to. So I just want to draw from this quote real quick to kind of put in context what I believe is missing in the discussions of how Black people in 2023 should view, the economy, their role in this economic system, in this country, in terms of how do we build wealth? How do we develop? So he says, our nation is now so rich. Keep in mind, this is, in the late 60s, we had the Korean War, we had World War II, we had, they were doing Vietnam, and, the Viet Cong, they were communists, they were fighting against the capitalist system. We had the USSR in the Cold War, the United States making them the primary target as those being a direct threat against them. And so they're trying to spread what they call democracy, and everyone in the world sees that is an economic system going on here that people have been studying for a long time. And so I think as a Black community, first and foremost, we got to contextualize King's figure as one in that context of capitalist economic struggle of global proportion, right? There was world wars over capitalism. This was in order to get the competitive edge so that they could trade, and gain profit, because that was the system. And so the world wars were fighting in competition. And then the Cold War USSR was to say, this was the first time in history where they had said, no. Poor people we have a system that we're saying is directly in opposition of capitalism, where poor and working people without the means of production don't have power. We want to switch that. And so instead of the people with the money having the power, we want the people who make the money for them to have the power, right? Because they are getting money and profiting. And so that's how they saw it in Russia, in the USSR. And so that's what the Cold War was about. That's what the Vietnam War was about, was the United States saying, anybody who messes with our primary source of power, which is this nifty little economic system that has been beneficial for us, right? Keep in mind, they had the slavery, they had the wars, and all of the oppression around the world. And so real quick, I know I blabber, but he goes, our nation is now so rich, so productive, that the continuation of persistent poverty is incendiary, meaning it's going to light a spark, because the poor cannot rationalize their deprivation. We have yet to confront and solve the international problems created by our wealth in a world still largely hungry and miserable. But more immediate and pressing is the domestic existence of poverty. It is an anachronism in the second half of the 20th century. So the United States had just emerged as the world leader, and the contradictions were what King was speaking to. Only the neglect to plan intelligently, meaning not laissez-faire, free for all, competition, dog eat dog, rat race. He's saying the collective planning and adequately and the unwillingness genuinely to embrace economic justice enabled it to persist. So this was his primary achievement and contribution, I believe, as a thinker, was to connect his moral cause with the economic cause that had been going on. The struggle had been going on for centuries. We weren't able to connect it. The United States kind of rubbed it out of our consciousness with the Red Scare. What do they call it? They were exiling artists and political activists, saying capitalism is destroying the fabric of our society, whether it's the material gains that have us starving on the bread lines at work, or the moral corrosion of our society, where the poor people are fighting themselves, and white poor are hurting the black poor, and they can't direct their efforts in a way that's productive, it seems. So he says, social conflict is not the product of skilled agitation. The apathy from which Negroes suffered for so long was derived from their powerlessness and their acceptance of the myth that abundance was not available. He's saying it doesn't have to be like this. There doesn't have to be poor when we have the ability to plan more intelligently. They are now accumulating power. He's saying the powerless. They are taught by every media of communication that we are so opulent we can enjoy both butter and guns. That's a economic, old economic reference. Guns and butter is like, two relatively unconnected things that they have to decide, economically, comparative or cost benefit analysis. And it says that is why they confront the white power structure with their program and challenge it to produce one of its own. The creative combining of both programs would unite social and economic justice into a single package of freedom. I'm going to wrap it up here. He goes, the Negro in 1966 does not issue his challenge in isolation. So it's not black capitalism versus white capitalism. It would be absurd to think that in a competition scenario that black people being so disadvantaged should internalize a strategy of rapacious competition, which is what capitalism is characterized by. Selma in 1965 made clear that there are white Americans who cherish decency and democracy, meaning we can work together, who will physically come to the scene of danger, who will fight for their nation, not only on foreign battles, but where its integrity is threatened within its borders. When 50,000 Americans, white and Negro, Protestant, Catholic, Jew, and non-believer, assembled in haste from all corners of the land at Montgomery, there lived again in a luminous moment the spirit of the Minutemen who at Lexington and Concord electrified the world, meaning our country used to stand for a real intense fight for freedom that people, it changed the world, America, because they were fighting against the monarchy, which was clear to them at that point was intolerable. And so King is describing the conditions where the American society are realizing that it's intolerable to have this kind of system. So revolution was what he was speaking to. He goes, Negroes expect their freedom not as subjects of benevolence. You're not going to give us our freedom. We have to take it. We're not going to play your game. We have to take it in our own hands. But as Americans who were at Bunker Hill, he's speaking to our revolutionary past, who toiled to clear the forests, drain the swamps, build the roads, who fought the wars and dreamed the dreams the founders of the nation considered to be an American birthright. So that's what I want to leave with you guys. I would love to open that discussion up to see what we can, get from King's references to an economic revolution, the ones that were in the World War and the ones with the Cold War and all of these wars. United States, we're not allowed to talk about communism, socialism, the main critiques of capitalism. And so black folk, we're not involved in the international circles when we have China, whose now economic growth is is surpassing the United States, and they're calling themselves communists. They're calling themselves critics of this economic system, right? And they're learning from Russia. They're learning from this stuff, but we have to do it too. We were part of this. Malcolm X was a socialist. Martin was a socialist. Angela, Huey, Hampton, each
Hey,
and every one of them.
Andre.
So I'll close with that.
We want to pump the brakes real quick.
Woo,
I got that Malcolm spirit.
I see.
That Martin.
I know
Yeah.
Malcolm X is a capitalist is coming up at some point.
Yeah, you was ready since 5 a.m. You had your points.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
I feel
Well,
it.
I studied development economics, in grad school, and so I know what the white folk have to deal with. We got to be able to have this conversation, right? So just having the conversation is all I want.
Yes, thank you. We having that conversation tonight. You brought up so many points, and I was just like, "Woo!" He is laying it on us tonight. But I do want to be respectful of other people with their hands up in their time. So, Markia.
The quote that I used for tonight was during his Nobel Peace Prize address in '64. He said, "The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. No individual or nation can be great if it does not have a concern for the least of these." And I always liked that quote because my grandfather used to, y'all know the 5%ers. My granddad used to swear up and down he was a 5%er, right? And he used to say that a nation doesn't necessarily have to be a country of people. It's just a group of people with a similar mindset. And so for me, that quote always meant to me about the village. If we're gonna bring back the village, then we have to school ourselves. We need to school the people who don't know. We have to develop the underdeveloped. We got to feed the unfed, like, with sustenance as well as with education. And that's one of the reasons I've always been so passionate about reaching back and giving back and volunteering and doing stuff like that, because even back then, right? Like, that's one of the things. Somebody said it earlier. I don't know what group chat this is. I'm in a bunch of different group chats, but somebody said earlier, like, are we better or worse after MLK, right? That was one of the conversations that we had today. And this quote always reminds me that, in my opinion, we're not any better because we're still not feeding the unfed, right? People get money and forget what it was like when they was broke. They don't reach back. Instead, they scheme, scam, and try to get as much money out of these same communities who poured into them. Like, and it just kind of humbles me a little bit and reminds me that, no matter how big I get, I don't mean shit if I'm not reaching back and taking care of people. I'm not helping my community or my nation if I'm not doing my part and making sure that everybody is given kind of like an even playing field. But that was why I chose that quote for today.
Thank you, Markia. And I want to go to Jonathan.
Not Marquis, we must be in sync today because I've been digging a lot into the stats, and one of the things that, as you see, obviously we're older, and one of the questions I had while I'm trying to look at data to kind of back it up is, are we, as all personal finance influencers, people who are developing these platforms, but also expanding our own financial independence, are we adding to the number of African American people with wealth, or are we replacing it? Are we, after all these people are educated, are we shifting more down to it, to our people in poverty, people who just can't get that first good job, and all these different things? Are we providing step ladders to move things up? And so that's the only thing that I look at when I'm kind of assessing who I follow, what they're doing. Always for the culture. I get everybody has to make their coin, saying your business, you can't do everything. But the biggest part about money is it can impact and it can uplift. And on the blessing side of things, you can give the right person $10,000 and it can completely change their family because of the opportunity it now lends itself to them. But are we doing enough of that with our funds rather than hey, we found a way to make something go viral, and this information is great. But at the end of the day, if I can teach and you guys can teach as well, but if no one's actually investing and taking it, and they're just really taking up the entertainment of it all, did we really help the scenario?
Right, right. And I'm glad you brought that up because that goes right into the quote that I just put up, I pinned up on the top. And it says, we must create full employment or we must create incomes. People must be made consumers by one method or the other. Once they are placed in this position, we need to be concerned that the potential of the individual is not wasted. So that kind of tied right in. So thank you for that segue. I did not pay him. That kind of tied right into the quote that I wanted to put up there as well. Camari?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what Marquis was talking about in terms of what are we better after King. I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. It's not a linear thing. Um, if you look at the numbers, if we dive into the numbers, unemployment rate is about the same when King marched on Washington. Home ownership, the black home ownership is lower than it was before King marched on Washington. I would probably say entrepreneurship might be up a little bit higher. But here's the thing, because it's hard to really go back and look at these things because things build on themselves. We probably wouldn't be able to have this conversation right now had it not been for MLK. Twitter would have been segregated. Airlines would have been more segregated. Um, Jobs would have been more segregated. It would have just been crazy. Lynching would have been still out of control. So, in one vein, I would say yes, we're doing better, but on another vein, I would say we're also kind of been in limbo. And I wouldn't blame King for that. Some people like to blame King for his stance. I think that's very elementary approach to thinking and examining this. But I would say we made some progress in some things, and we kind of went back on other things. But I think now we have the opportunity. We had the greatest opportunity we've ever had. Probably had the greatest access to capital we've ever had. The question is now, what are we going to do going forward?
Boom. Wish I had a mic drop. No, but seriously though, that is the question. And before I give my thoughts, I want to go to Jonathan because he raised his hand.
Yeah, it's just because Kamari had again evoked another thought that I know we had spoke about it on different editions, but just like the whole black banking thing, like I've checked out being a black bank because working there, all that type of stuff. But I looked at it and I'm like, man, their interface, their products, their services aren't competitive to be able to run in this market. So while I would want to bank there, you know what I mean, I can't bank there because
Which
I'm
black
gonna
bank
have
though?
an issue. It was one of the Atlanta ones.
Oh, okay, I was going to say
Yeah,
let's not generalize all of them though.
yeah. No, I checked them. I definitely wasn't partial, but I'm saying the one I was gonna actually try to utilize because of proximity and all that was in Atlanta. But it's still the purpose of once we get skill, like think about it, can they attract top talent? Can they attract the same top talent that is at all these other financial institutions? And I mean, I went to apply, but I went to apply because it was a black bank. But having a conversation with them and what they pay and where I was trying to go, I couldn't take that hit at that point. It's something on my I guess you could say line of sight that yeah, I'm in a better space. I'm like, okay, I can go here now because I'm not so much after the financial impact. I'm more on, hey, how can I help your organization move to be able to compete in this world so that not that you have a African American option, that you have an African American viable option. And that's the thing that I mean, I do all black businesses and support all black businesses, but the fact is when we look at viability to compete, are we able to do that? Have we filled up those gaps to be able to compete, not just lean on it's a black business support it? Because you can have the black support, but I mean that's cool, but the viability to compete in this market is still oftentimes missed. And you're right, Camari, on your last point, after I review anything, how much progress and all that type of thing, I'm still of the mindset that even if we haven't made much progress, the whatever standard that is, in my mind, we have the most or the largest opportunity because there's no way to go but up. It can't get worse.
Yes, thank you. And I mean, to tag on to your point though, Jonathan, like, can we be viable as Black businesses? And I think part of that is having talent actually take those jobs. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the chicken or the egg type of scenario in my mind. It's like, okay, we're calling for them to be more viable. We're calling for them to have better rates, or, offer this, that, and the other. But how do they get there if we don't step up and do it, And, but at the same time, I see your point, we can't just keep taking hits and then it doesn't go anywhere. So, I feel like it's kind of the chicken or the egg type of debate on, how do we get there? Where do we go from here? To Kamari's point, right? And speaking of Kamari, go ahead.
No, I was want to say, well, one, Jonathan, I'm sorry I cut you off because I just wanted to be clear that we wasn't just talking about all black banks. But you make a great point also, right? We shouldn't be in the mindset of just supporting black just for the sake of supporting black. We should be in the mindset of supporting great that just so happens to be black. Because greatness is a part of us. And when we aren't doing that and not trying to get religious, I feel that we're kind of falling short of the glory of God. But I won't go too deep into that. But again, some folks think it's just about throwing up a shingle, putting some business, putting some flyers out, getting some people out there. But it's more than that. I mean, a lot of times I would say your business or your vocation should really be a calling. And when you come to deliver whatever it is you're delivering it with love because people can feel that. But I know Rahkim's about to schedule us. We about to run out of time, so I don't want to say nothing else.
I appreciate that.
Yes, we are preaching tonight in the spirit of MLK. I want to go ahead and go to Rakim, and then Markia, and then Andre will wrap us up. And we have about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the topic of black businesses because I know that's probably come up quite a lot in some of the spaces that we've done, and I always like to defer back to The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And we have Black History Month coming up next month anyway. In that there's a section of the book where he talks about how, I mean, really the whole book, he talks about how we are socialized to embrace this idea of inferiority. And even in the socialization of embracing inferiority, when we go into our own institutions like the HBCUs or businesses that we create, that there is this idea that ours is not as good as our white counterparts. And so while I agree with everything that's been said from, Kamari's perspective, from Jonathan's perspective, I think too when we're looking at just the psychological trauma that we have experienced and continue to experience through the socialization that we get from school age all the way up, that we need to look at these businesses, these institutions, these whatever it is that we're supporting, um from the perspective of grace, and that maybe it's not going to look and feel the way that a Bank of America is, um but it's going to check off the boxes for how we need to use it so that we can get to a place where we can develop this institution to where a Bank of America is. And I'm just using banks as the example because that was the example given. So that's and then really quickly, I threw up my tweet from September of last year that got me into a whole lot of trouble about Malcolm X. I said Malcolm X was a capitalist, and this is to an earlier point that was made, and I'm not opening us up for dialogue around that particular tweet, but I think when we were talking about participating in the system of capitalism, that was really the sentiment behind sharing that tweet, in that people will recognize the outspoken views, whether they be political or economic or a combination of both, without acknowledging that we all have to play this game. And so when we talk about the work that Dr. King has done, particularly around the civil rights movement, and all of the traveling and organizing and protesting and what have you, we have to also acknowledge that there were dollars that were raised, pooled, and given to support that movement from other Black and non-Black individuals. And so when we talk about, again, participating in this system, whether we have warm, fuzzy feelings about capitalism or not, we have to acknowledge the role that, and I think Jonathan said this earlier, the role that capital plays in ultimate, I'm sorry, maybe it was Anthony, and making a difference in our day to day.
Absolutely. And that's something that I learned in actually doing the research for this space is MLK had the same thoughts. Like money moves the needle, period. Especially here in America. And so being able to like in that time fundraise and get donations and things like that, that's how they were able to keep going. And when we start, like I think it was Camari said, he was saying that MLK was like, pull back your money from the banks, pull back your money from this, pull back your money from that. That's how change happens, right? So I think we can gather just from this conversation and looking at the quotes that we all posted, it was all based on a capitalism thought process, right? So anyway, I just wanted to add that. Okay, go ahead, Markia.
Oh,
Listening to all like everybody talk, I swear it makes so much sense now, because if you think about it, like we were conditioned by like media, and most notably with the rise of social media, that like, oh, you should be spending all your money on jewelry, and you should be doing this, and you should be buying that, and you got to be the best looking this, and you got to have the BBL, and you got to, like, they put so much emphasis on these material things so that we don't have the money to put together or to donate or to collect or to do productive things. And I know somebody said it earlier where they were talking about how damn, this might not have been the space. Yeah, I was in a couple MLK spaces today, but earlier I was having a conversation and they were saying that it was about how a lot of Martin Luther King's quotes are often misused in order to manipulate us into doing the opposite of what MLK wanted to do in the first place. For example, when they always talk about how, oh, he wanted desegregation. I mean, he wanted desegregation and blah, blah, blah. But then nobody talks about how, like, after his big famous speech, he walked back a lot of those statements. Nobody brings that up when they're trying to, like, but they always have that one quote, the one or two quotes that they weaponized against us to keep us from, I don't want to say keep us from unifying in a sense, but low key, that's what it's starting to feel like. And I'm younger than a lot of y'all. So like, the knowledge that you all have of Dr. King, like he said, what we got was a watered down version. We got that MLK was compliant, that he went with the what he wanted, what the white man wanted, and he was he wasn't it was always Malcolm versus MLK. It was never them together. I guess you could say. Like I said, I'm a lot younger than a lot of y'all, so my education is a little bit different from y'all's. But it was a very watered down version of who MLK actually was. And then they also didn't give us resources to do our own search. So we was taught to take what they told us as gospel. And so now we're moving forward. And I never even gave thought to capitalism and the civil rights movement and socialism and all that stuff until I met y'all, until we all started having these conversations. And so, yes, that says a lot to, the public school system and blah, 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 blah. But that also says a lot to me that I really sat there and swallowed the medicine that they gave me and never questioned it. I just kept moving forward through life. And that's how I ended up joining the military, because I was like, oh, I'd do anything for a check. As long as I got that insurance, I'm willing to do this and do that and risk my life and all that other stuff. Because I never thought to question that way of thinking. I never thought to even question who was teaching it to me. For me, it was one of those things where it was like, it was good enough for my mom, it was good enough for my grandmother, so it was good enough for me. My family, I'm come from a family of people who got one job, stayed there for 20, 25 years and collected a pension. And so for me, when I was old enough to make that decision, I made that decision. I was going to join the military. I was going to do my 2025, get out, work at the post office, maybe pull out another 2025. I never thought there could be a different life for myself until I got older. And unfortunately, life didn't go as planned, and I started pivoting. And that's when I realized, and I think COVID also was a huge wake up for a lot of people because of how life changed so radically. And then life still went on. A lot of us think that if something don't happen, it's the end of the world, or we can't come back from it, or anything like that. But COVID showed us that not only can you go through a huge change and come out on the other side, maybe better than what you were before, but the world's still gonna go on. So I don't know. This was a very eye-opening conversation. And Camari, I already know you got a list of books that you can pass on over, Mr. I know everything about history because I probably was there. So make sure you drop those too on your Twitter feed today, please, so I can go back and read them. But this was definitely an eye-opening conversation, because a lot of the things that you guys tell me about the people I've idolized, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Carter G. Woodson, W.B. Du Bois, were things that I was never taught. So it's really cool to see these other viewpoints and to hear these other, I guess, these other opinions of such prolific people that kind of inspire or encourage me to dig a little deeper into, why do you do this? Why, why? Okay, yeah, you were taught this, but why? So yeah, thank y'all for this.
Thank you, Markia. And really, really quick, because I heard Camari do when I finished talking. So I wanted to pop over because I didn't know if you wanted to say something real quick on that last point, or.
I mean, I have a lot, but I'm still trying to, process that love and shade I just got from Markia. Basically saying I'm that old because I was at every historical event. I'm like the Fat Joe of Black history.
You did the walk, my boy.
But no, listen, I will say this. King said a lot of things. He also said that he would love, let me get it right. He said, I fear I am integrating my people into a burning house, that burning house being America. He did walk back or change and look at his position a little bit differently, but you also have to understand that King was the front man to make the appeal for all these people, right? So he was asking for grandiose things and hope, that basically asking for what I want and taking whatever we can get. So it's I don't want to say tongue in cheek because I think that'd be disrespectful, but there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. And I also feel, the reason why I said oof, I don't feel that Black folks as a community looks at the role of money, capitalism, properly. And a lot of times we conflate capitalism with imperialism, and I think that does us a disservice, because Black people created capitalism, African people created capitalism, and so if you look at things, right, if you look at the Montgomery bus boycott, which was probably the most successful civil rights ever event, where they boycotted 381 days. That was capitalism at work, right? Capitalism can be used as a pro and a minus. It all depends on how it's used. Just like anything else, a gun is not good or bad. It's how it's used by the person. If the people are evil that are using it, of course you're going to get evil things. And if the people that are using capitalism are using it, of course you're going to get evil things. But it's a great time for us to really show our God, or the God in us, to come through and show how to use capitalism and use it in the right way. And for the record, Rahkim, I'm actually glad you always bring us back to remember the grace, because that wasn't my intention about talking about black business. I always having grace for black businesses. And I think we should have grace for black businesses and just black people in general. So I hope nobody was taking what I said as black people or black businesses are trash. That wasn't my intent. But that's all I got. I could go on and on and on, but I don't want to.
Thank you so much, Camari. And with that, we have 4 minutes left. So I'm going to hop over to Andre because you've been so patiently waiting, then Tamika, and then I'm going to take us home. So each of you give us like a 2-minute spiel.
Thank you so much, Tiff, and thank you guys for your
That's a
time.
hard 2 minutes.
This is great. This is a great room. So a few things I wanted to touch on real quick. Let's see if I can do it in 2 minutes. So, just to push back on the conflating of capitalism and imperialism, I think in my opinion, I would say it's the opposite. People think that, or they think if they call it imperialism, that is not connected. Capitalism is based on competition, right? Profit. Um, one of the sisters, she mentioned a good source, Karl Marx's Capital. He wrote, it's the largest critique on capital, and it's based on a whole tradition of socialism. Capitalism started in Europe in 1600s, late 16, 17, early 17. So we got to make sure we understand and give white people their credit, right? Like we've created civilization and all that other stuff. Capitalism is the system we have now. We don't control it, and it's because it wasn't designed by us. It was a need, and you had accumulative primitive accumulation, which is one of the things that Marx talks about. It's a concept where he talks about how capitalism kind of gets started in the first place, because nobody has that kind of relative advantage in terms of how to get resources unless you kind of take stuff that doesn't belong to you. And so he goes, this is about Nehru, accelerating interest rate of unemployment. Somebody brought up unemployment, and we want to just look at how, if it's possible that capitalism can be used in a way that produces the greatest outcome for everybody, and whether or not right now that's the case. So he says, if the Federal Reserve is committed to not allowing the overall unemployment rate to fall, right? So just really quick again, non-accelerating interest rate of unemployment means it's the interest rate that they want to keep, that or it's the unemployment rate that they want to keep from going below a certain point, because then investment won't be able to afford it because they have to pay wages to people, right? And so we're seeing a lot of unemployment after COVID. The unemployment, you guys know about the huge stimulus, and so it was like 40 million people. Crazy economic crashes, instability and inequality under capitalism. And so he says, and he kind of ties it into race, right? So he says, this is an article on the Nehru. This is not technically true, of course, because there are other races, but we can. Oh, sorry, excuse me. He says, if the Federal Reserve is committed to not allowing the overall unemployment rate to fall, as they would be if they believed it was at Nehru, which I explained, then the only way for black unemployment rate to fall is if white unemployment rate rises. This is not technically true, of course, because there are other races, but we can generally say the only way to reduce the unemployment rate of a group with a higher than overall unemployment rate is to increase the unemployment rate of another group. Under Nehru's sensitive monetary policy, that aims to keep the unemployment rate from falling, meaning they won't allow people to create more jobs, because the competition is such that if any one business decides to do the humane thing and forego profit, then they're not going to be in business. So this is a fundamental contradiction in capitalism. And to the younger people in the room, I would highly suggest that you look into Marxism and socialism and communism, because this is the thing that was at the heart of our struggle. And so it's nothing more than a critique. There you go. Thank you.
Sorry. But we have to move on because it is 10 o'clock. But thank you so much for the points that you did bring up. And we might have to continue that conversation with another space. So, Tamika, go ahead, bring us home, and then I'll wrap us up.
Just wanted to wrap up with this quote from MLK from a speech. It wasn't a speech, an interview that he did 4 years after the I Have a Dream speech. And it said, I think the biggest problem now is we got our gains over the last 12 years at bargain rates, so to speak. It didn't cost the nation anything.
Tamika, you okay?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear
Hey,
you.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, so I just wanted to bring that quote up from that speech because he in that interview he just talks about how his views had changed from the beginning of the civil rights movement and how they evolved um, and stuff like that. But yeah, that's all I wanted to bring up.
Yes, thank you for that. And I mean, thinking back to MLK and his various messages, you have to be mindful that this was a changing time as well. Like, just like we're in changing times, he was in changing times too. And so at the end of the day, he might have said some things at one point, he might have said something else at another point, all that stuff. So, just like sometimes our ideas and viewpoints and maybe what we say has to change, his did too. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Tamika. This was an awesome space, and I'm glad we got to talk about MLK on this Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and Day of Service. That was one thing that we didn't bring up. And I'm glad that you all were able to join. We went over some powerful quotes, and I'm just glad that we were able to have this space. Thank you all so much for joining. If you are in the room, be sure that you follow all the individuals up here because we are living the dream that MLK was talking about in his speeches. So we're trying to make it happen, and we hope that you all do too. So thank you so much for joining us. And like I said, this is Fin Noir, a space for Black Money Talk. It's every Monday at 9 p.m. So we hope to see you next week. Bye.
Later, y'all.
Thank you for listening, joining, and being a part of the Money Talk with Tiff podcast this week. You can check Tiff out every Thursday for a new Money Talk podcast. But if you just can't wait until next week, you can listen to previous podcast episodes at moneytalkwitht.com or follow Tiff on all social media platforms at Money Talk with T. Until next time, spend wise by spending less than you make. A word to the money wise is always sufficient.